Okay, we are live once again from UES Education, this time with David Hawkins of the University Guys. David normally doesn't need much of an introduction, but I thought we'll give him do him the justice of allowing him to introduce himself and explain what he does, who he is, and why we're talking to him today. So, David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Jason. Yes, thank you for having me. I'm ever so slightly nervous that on your side of the screen where you can see the Facebook, there will be all sorts of people I know watching on gleefully to see me go under the grill. My name is David Hawkins. I'm the director and founder of the University Guys. I am a college counsellor, both by training and I guess by inclination. I geek out on university applications, and so the company that I now run, we support students making university applications to countries all around the world, primarily US, Canada, Europe, and the UK, though we always enjoy doing something random as well. And I fell into this work. I was a history teacher down at beautiful Taunton School in the Southwest, picked up a bit of responsibility helping with international universities and all universities, worked for a couple of years as the head of college counselling at the International School of Brussels, and then for various complicated and too depressing for a Facebook Live personal reasons, found myself needing to become an independent counsellor, and now coming up for 4 years working in this space.
Great, thank you. That was a very brief introduction. Obviously, the story is much longer than that. Yeah. I thought maybe we'll go into one small detail there, which is when you started picking up these responsibilities when you're at Taunton College, what was it about those responsibilities that really piqued your interest and made you want to go down that path?
Yeah, it's something I reflect on quite a lot, actually, and think about, how did my career kind of take this odd turn? I thought I'd be looking for my kind of maybe deputy headship, possibly if things gone well, a first headship now. And the dream of working in a school had been one I always wanted. And when I think back at it, and certainly now, when a lot of my work is helping students see where they might be most fulfilled with their university education, I reflect back on why I really liked history. So history was the subject I studied at university. Even my A-level choices were all framed because I liked history. And I think it's because I like knowing stuff. I think that's what it comes down to. And history, to someone with my mindset, if it had happened in the past, I could study it because that's the point of history. And so I think that's what I enjoyed about it. And this world then of university advising enables you to do that, I think, to an even greater level, certainly for me, in that 1 minute I can be talking about a student who's really fascinated by global economies and really wants to look at pursuing that. Whereas another time it's a student who just loves the minute detail of biochemistry. And another one, a student is fascinated by history of art. And so I love the fact that this process gives me the skills to do it. And really, as soon as I started advising students on university applications, I just fell in love with it and thought that actually, I love teaching history and I love the topic, but this actually enables me to impact students in a way that is greater even than teaching them.
That's great. And you went over to the International School of Brussels, ISB, after Taunton. How was your experience there in terms of advising students on university applications? How was it different in Brussels to being in Taunton?
Yeah, it was a fascinating experience. Actually, one I was talking about with someone earlier today, a counsellor at a school in the UK, that I went from, my last couple of years at Taunton, I was teaching a pretty decent timetable of history. I was the head of careers, so running all the higher education elements there. I was coaching cricket and rugby, neither of them particularly well. I was a boarding tutor. I lived on site for a little bit. So I had the full-on kind of boarding school life. And I think looking back, I was doing each of those jobs decently, but none of them well. And it was going into an international school, and I'd already had a bit of exposure to it through knowing people through International Association of College Admissions Counselling and knowing that there were these things called college counsellors, and it was a full-time job. Something that's news, I think, to a lot of head teachers in the UK, that you can pay people to do this full-time. And it was, I remember probably 2 or 3 days in, a student coming to me with something complex. One that stands out was a student who wants to study translation studies at a university in India. And my kind of mindset had been, okay, well, I'll have a quick search around and see what I can do, but you're going to have to do this on your own. Actually thinking, no, this is my job. If I need to spend a day looking into this, making phone calls and contacting people, I can do. And I was very fortunate at ISB. My position also meant that I was on the leadership team at the high school. So I was involved in lots of policy discussions where where students went on to next was a key part of what we were doing.
Mm.
I had a team of 2 other college counsellors. I had an assistant for the department. We had a registrar who dealt with all the paperwork, and we also had a social and emotional counsellor. We had a budget which was many, many, many multiples of the little budget I'd had at Taunton to do this. And it was, though I missed the teaching and still miss being in a classroom with a bunch of students teaching them about the Counter-Reformation or the causes of Pearl Harbor, I was able to do that job properly. And that's, I think, having found myself coming back to the UK, of being able to say to schools and to students that there is so much that can be done with university advising. And unfortunately, many UK schools are just not able to do that. I can do that job properly for you and give you that huge amount of support that you might need to see what on earth is out there.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'll be talking a lot more about how it works inside schools over the course of the next 50 minutes to an hour. I just want to let anyone know who's watching, and I know we've got a good number of people watching, that you are welcome to ask questions of David. David, as you're probably already starting to discover, is very experienced and knows an awful lot about, I won't say every university in the world, otherwise he's going to get a challenge. But he knows an awful lot about universities and applications. So if you've got any questions, whether you're a teacher, a parent, or a student, please pop your question in the chat, and we will we'll answer them, and we'll see if David knows the answer.
Yeah, and if I can't, I've got some books behind me that I might be able to pull out that can help. Exactly. I think one of the wonderful things actually about college counselling, and I've discovered, going way back to the first time I discovered there were college counsellors through a good friend, Joan Liu, is that you accept that you don't know everything. And I think that's a really important thing for anybody, that there are limitations to everybody's knowledge. But if I don't know someone, I know someone who might. And I think that's a really wonderful thing about this job.
Mm. Okay, great. So, of course, now you're an independent education counsellor. And do you want to explain what that means for people who don't know what one of those is or why you exist?
Yeah, so I'll talk about kind of 2 levels of that. There is kind of, what is independent university advising full stop, and then what is the kind of the model that I think is the right one. People may, what's the phrase now? People may respectfully disagree, but I'll give my opinion. So a college counsellor in the independent sense is very different from what some people might call an agent. And I think that's a really important distinction to make here, particularly in the UK context. I work for a family. So a family will contract the university guys to support their student with university applications. And though we have very good relationships with a lot of universities, we are getting no kickback from that university. So we do not get paid for successful placement. We have no partnership agreements. There is nothing where we feel that our commercial priorities will trump the fact that we are working for the student. And it's probably important to say that, and I say it quite often to the families that we start working with, typically we're paid by the family, but we counsel the student. Now, most of the time, those 2 things go in hand, but sometimes there is an issue where actually what the family wants and what the student wants might be different. We counsel the student. And that comes into the sort of the second part of what I was saying about the model I like to do this. There are a lot of people, some of them who do a very good job, particularly in London, where a lot of our work in the UK happens to be, who might have been to university in the United States, might be American, might have found themselves in London, who can set up with a nice quick website and use terms like early decision and public ivies and seem that they have a lot of knowledge, but don't do this in a way which either shows they have a qualification or they have memberships and affiliations. So I've got my little certificate there. There we go. This is my professional membership of the Independent Educational Consultants Association, which is a US membership body with very high standards in which to join. It took me a long time to be able to even apply for that level of membership, and has a very strict ethical code. And I think that's fundamentally important. The scandal that some people may have known, and it was in the news again recently with what was called Varsity Blues, where lots of wealthy families in California and other parts of the world paid a chap called Rick Singer to sort of pretend that their students were athletes and get them guaranteed admission to certain top tier US universities, shows that there are really ethical issues at the heart of independent counselling. I say it when I give a talk in schools, and I kind of joke about it, but I think it's important that I say, if I stuff up, there are 4 different organisations that a school should be able to get me kicked out of, with different ethical policies and different requirements. And some of them are an affiliation, some of them are membership, some of them are accreditation. But I think it's really important. And when I talk to schools about this kind of stuff, I find it really staggering sometimes. I've been quite public on LinkedIn about this. A school, and having been a school leader, you don't send your students to a physiotherapist who's just got a nice glossy page on Google and a friend says, oh, we'll use that person. You don't bring in a violin teacher who's actually just sticking on a CD and the kid's miming along. But people seem happy to let their kids get US university advice, which unfortunately is where it most is, from someone who, within the community probably doesn't even know what they're doing, and wouldn't be welcome at some of the main conferences, wouldn't be at the CIS forum, would be at International ACAC. And I find it staggering that actually schools are happy to go, you know what, we'll take that risk. There are, very strict ethical rules about this, particularly in the US. I'm not the only person in the UK who does this in that kind of way, and around the world. And it's, to me, it's the only way of doing it. I should be accountable. And if you're not part of a membership body, then if a family have a problem with your services, so I think it's a really key point here. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit more about that accreditation. So you're a member of the IECA, and we're both members of International ACAC. Do you want to talk about what other kind of accreditations or bodies there are that you should look out for if you're thinking about getting a consultant? Because of course, as you said, there are lots of good consultants out there, but very, very few of them have got the high level accreditation that you've got. What other things can people look out for that might give them some reassurance?
Yeah, so I think it's going to depend a little bit on the country of which you're looking, and indeed the circumstances. So I put my hand up and say I have never sat a formal qualification in university advising. I've been to lots of courses, but in some bodies, particularly in a lot of American accredited schools, you'd need to be certified. So there are courses run by UCLA, UC Irvine, Lehigh University, and a few others, which can formally give an advisor some kind of certificate. So there's that kind of model of someone actually going and being qualified. International ACAC is a membership organization. I mean, in terms of sort of the ethical, I guess, policing, for want of a better word, with that, you are trusted that you will sign up and you will conform to these standards. And if you don't, then there is an investigation process and you could then be removed from the association. It's a relatively strong model. The vast majority of international ACAC members are either advisors based in schools around the world or admissions officers at universities, but there is the sort of subset that you and I fall into, Jason. So you commit to doing the right thing, and if you're found not to, they can kick you out. So there's that model. The CIS, Council of International Schools, is a very kind of different model, and for very kind of complicated, historical, boring reasons. There's like 19 of us now who were within the Council of International Schools community, and that means your university has to be a member, or you worked at a school that has to be a CIS member. CIS is a bit like Ofsted or ISI. Like International School of Brussels, it was not a Belgian school, so it couldn't be inspected by Belgium. So who inspects it? Well, CIS inspect it. And so because I'd worked at a CIS school and have that body of experience behind me, I could become an independent affiliated consultant for them. IECA and HECA, which is the other main body, the Higher Education Consultants Association in the US, and which I would say I'm actually a candidate member for, is about quite a deep dive into someone's professional experience. So I had to document the number of university visits I'd done over a period of a decade. So I had to have done evaluative visits of, I think it was 50 different universities in multiple countries over a decade. With documentation, I had to get references. References from families I'd worked with successfully, members from universities where students I'd worked with had gone, and indeed references from other members of the IECA community. It was an extraordinarily rigorous process. I would say the documentation was more than I needed for my PGCE when I qualified as a teacher. So I was very pleased. And I went into it not knowing whether I would get it. And probably within my professional experience in university advising, probably the thing I'm proudest of, that I didn't expect to come straight in as a professional member. There were a number of different levels: student member, associate member, professional member. And yeah, I feel deeply proud of that and honoured that there are, within the United Kingdom, just 2 professional members.
Yeah, great. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's test this supposed knowledge.
Who's asking the question?
Well, the next question I was going to ask was about how you go about finding a college. And conveniently, we do have a question here from someone who's saying, what are the key factors you should consider when you're trying to find a college? Now, We know there are literally thousands of colleges in the States and even more than that worldwide. So how, when you're faced with a new student who maybe isn't too sure about what he or she wants to study, or where he or she wants to study, how do you go about finding out what sort of college would be the right place for them?
Yeah, so typically a family will come because they kind of have a plan in mind. You know, they're thinking they want this thing, and most commonly now it will come because they've heard me give a talk at their school, or my colleague Richard give a talk, or you know, we are known to their head of sixth form, their head of careers, and they say, oh, you should have a chat with these people. So they come with some kind of sense, I want to go to America, I want to study in the Netherlands. And from that starting point, and I think probably I'm slightly pushier than perhaps would make the most commercial sense to be, but try and just prod and push a little bit and see what is the motivation behind that. So it might be that the student really wants to go to what they perceive to be a good university. And so it's trying to explore, well, what do they mean by good? What do the family mean by good? And to push them out. It might be they want to study a subject. It might be they want a different kind of experience. But to try and just sort of break behind that initial surface and see what's there. And once I kind of get a sense into, we're talking not just about an aspiration, we're talking about the kind of criteria that leads to that aspiration, then that will guide me in terms of the tools I would use to go for next. So if we use the US as an example, I was just delivering another Facebook Live for a boarding school specialist company I do some things with sometimes. And we had a question about, my daughter wants to study biomedical engineering at MIT. And I'm now in my head thinking, if that family, well, how would I peer that back? Because that might not be the best place, given how MIT's curriculum works for that student. And certainly she's not going to apply for biomedical engineering. So I would then in the US start to look into all sorts of different ways in which students can filter down universities. So typically what we do is we put students through a card sort process where we would look at, you know, over 100 different criteria and say, right, does the university that you are going to aspire to in the US, does it have to have this? Now that might be a major, it might be biomedical engineering, it might be a location like Cambridge or Massachusetts, it might be I wanted to have fraternities and sororities, it might be I want to be able to ski. So we go through this, and must it have that? Must it not have that? Would you kind of like it to have that, but it's not a deal breaker? Or are you just genuinely not bothered? And a lot of these things, a lot of the criteria that we're asking students to make a judgment on will be things that they have never even thought about when choosing a university, particularly if they're in the UK context, where it's, what do you want to study? What grades have you got? And then there's things like location, size of university, type of campus, that kind of stuff. You know, when you're saying to a student, do you want 4 seasons? You know, when I visit US universities, and you're the same, Jason, you sometimes hear students saying, I chose this university in the Northeast because it had 4 seasons. And first time I thought that, is that the hotel chain? No, it's because they're from, you know, Arizona or New Mexico, and they've never seen autumn, never seen the fall. This is so saying to students that there is much more here, and you can pick a bunch of options in there. Now, at the same time, trying to explain perhaps to maybe a slightly skeptical family that this actually really matters in terms of the chances of getting in. And again, fairly commonly, and you'll know the same, you might have a family and they're saying, we want UCLA and NYU and Harvard and Brown and Stanford. And I'm looking at that going, well, that's a very different set of universities. And how can you, in a university like Stanford, which turns down sort of 29 out of every 30 people who apply, how can your application be really tailored to Stanford's style of experience and also be really tailored to Brown's kind of experience, which turns down 19 out of every 20 people who apply? So it's saying to the families as well that the choices of the type of university a student is going to make directly impact their ability to do every part of the process well. So it's sort of putting those two bits together. And then once I've got a sense of, okay, what matters to this student? And it might be the case that in that process, if we're starting off with the US, that I might think, well, actually, maybe I need to talk to them about Spain, or I need to talk to them about Japan, or I need to talk to them about India, because some of the things that they are saying here, they might be better suited to options elsewhere. And then once I've got that, I kind of test that criteria. So we'll put together a research grid with probably about a dozen universities where I'm saying that these will typically be places you've never heard of. Because if you put Stanford on the kids' lists, they're going to rate Stanford 10 out of 10 in most cases, because it's Stanford. So places they might not have heard of, and test that criteria. So the analogy I will use is a bit like a mixing desk for music or for lighting. we're trying to find that all of your criteria are 10 out of 10. But that's not likely to happen, and that would be a silly kind of process to go through. Would you like all your criteria out 7 out of 10? Or are there 3 which must be 10 out of 10 and the other 7 might be 3 out of 10? And so I'm trying to build a list where a student might say, let's say, for example, they want high rank, they want urban, they want a really strong economics program, they want 4 seasons, and they really want to be in the sort of northeast. Well, I might put Wash U on that list and go, well, it's giving you most of that, but the location's different than that. Now, I might also put, say, Amherst on that list as well and say, well, it's not as urban as others, and it might not be the size you're looking. And so I'm trying to create a list which enables me to then go through various iterations of this with a student and say, well, how serious are these different criteria in there? It's a very, very intense and drawn out process. Sometimes it falls into place really quickly. I can get to 5 or 6 goes round with some students about, this kind of stuff. But through that intensive process, they get to, empower themselves about it. And I love having these conversations sometimes where the mum is saying, well, why isn't Harvard on your list? And the daughter says, look, Mum, I've told you their core curriculum is just not going to suit me. I do not like the nature of their distribution requirements. I just can't see myself there. And for me, that's a joy because they are now making the choices rather than me saying, here's where you should go.
Okay. So lots of information there. I guess the obvious next question is, if a student is trying to do this themselves, and maybe they don't have access to a consultant, or maybe they go to a school where the advice is more UK centric than it is international. How can a student start to find out all the possible information about the different colleges worldwide that they might think about? Is there a good resource for them to look at?
Well, I'll plug my website, theuniversityguys.com, which we try and put a lot of stuff up on there, but that might be slightly facetious of me. I think the big thing, and Jason may roll his eyes because he and I share platforms at schools a lot, and he's heard me say this so often, but you need to get the UK context out of your head. It's really dangerous to judge your non-UK applications on the kind of way in which you would do UK. And I always use the analogy of, if you think about the game of football in the UK, you're going to be thinking of one sport. But if you think about football, if you're American or Australian, you might think of a completely different sport. And so don't talk at cross purposes and don't make assumptions. You need to learn more about the process. And I have some books here, FIS Guide and Princeton Review and a bunch of other things hidden around in here. So if you're doing this on your own, read a lot, go onto Amazon, buy books, go to your library. If the finances of your family situation are such that you can't buy books, go to your local public library and ask them to buy the book for you. But get your head into how students in other universities do this. Go onto websites, governmental websites. Be careful, that it's not, an agent masquerading as a government website. But Fulbright Commission for students in the UK going to the US, students in Ireland going to the US has their version. Studyinholland.nl, DAAD for Germany, and so on and so forth. EduCanada. Try and find some impartial information, and then very genuinely, if you find a university that you kind of think, actually, I like the sound of this. This place sounds interesting. Email them, or in this one day, Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, whatever them, and get some contact with them. I find I do a lot of training of school advisors in the UK. I remember it being quite odd thinking, I can email someone at the university. As an advisor, I can do that. And people email me back, but they do. And genuinely, if you email, say, Jen Peterman at McGill as an example, and she thinks, you know what, you don't have the grades for us, it's just not going to fit. But she can give you the contact details of someone at Concordia or Bishops or Queen's or wherever. People genuinely want to help students do this. So what I say to the families is, we do not sprinkle magic unicorn dust on you. You say, I have 3 daughters, the world I live in, but we do not turn you into some new kind of My Little Pony-esque special thing. We can help you navigate it. We can stop you making mistakes you don't know that you're making. We can reduce the stress and the workload because it can be a lot, but you can do this on your own. And there's a great example. I saw a news story about a year or so ago now from a student in the northeast of the UK admitted to Harvard. And I tagged Rowena Boddington from the Fulbright Commission, who runs the Southern Trust program, thinking, Rowena, great, this is one of yours. A wonderful program that helps high-achieving low-income kids get full aid at US universities. She came back and said, no, it's not one of ours either. And I think it's great that students actually can do this completely on their own. But certainly if it's the US, they have to go into it knowing it's a chunk of work. For other countries, it's great out there, but yeah, universities love to help, and yeah, entirely genuinely, stick me an email. Myself, Richard Brandy, one of us will get back to you and say, look, okay, you're not going to be honest with us. We have no money. We're not going to be able to pay you. Fantastic, great. I can just send you a bunch of free resources to go on and who to contact, and good luck to you.
Okay, you touched on something very important there, which was funding, of course. And you and I will have these questions quite often from students who we just come across through schools or through contacts, or people might put them in touch with us. And one of the first questions, be it a student or a parent, is always, how can I find funding if I can't afford the full fees? And I actually yesterday, I met someone. This is just a story to kind of highlight the frustrations about this sometimes. Yesterday, I met someone at a safe distance who told me that they were going off to Bristol for medical school. That's great. But I mentioned about what I do, and he said, oh, I thought about applying to the US, but I realized if I didn't get into Harvard, I wouldn't be able to afford to go. And I was thinking, okay, he's talking about need-blind universities here, but there are more than just Harvard, and also there are other ways of finding funding, but it is tricky. What would you say to someone like that, given a bit more time? What advice would you give them to try and find funding?
Yeah, well, I'm going to just very quickly get onto one of my old hobby horses here, which is I find it completely incomprehensible that students in the UK can't take their student loan beyond the UK, as students on the Channel Islands do. The deal is between the taxpayer and the student, so why not take £9,250 anywhere in the world? It doesn't matter, but that's a different thing. I think what you highlight in there with the financial thing is just a major challenge that we have in the UK, is that UCAS is a really, really simple university application process. Now, I know there are many people going, but it's extraordinarily complicated. And yes, I'm not saying it's a piece of cake to do, but on the global scale, and I've advised students on 27 different countries at the count I did earlier, just to make sure where Jason might test me on, UCAS is really easy compared to other places. And it can sometimes make people think that I'll do 20 minutes work and I understand now enough about this. I used to do training events for the student world under a previous set of owners. And I would start that by saying, right, who's here for half a day who thinks they're going to walk out of here knowing everything about every other country's applications? And half put their hand up and I go, I'm really sorry. I've been doing this for 7 years, 8 years, and I don't know anything. It's so much more. So the finances, there's a couple of different levels to that. The first one is you've got to work out what is a comparable outcome for that family. We are not a country like Nigeria or Nepal or Togo, where there are capacity issues or the quality of universities might be different to other countries, where anything in another country might, to a family, be perceived as better what I've got if I stay here. I might be doing a disservice to some of those countries, so I apologise if I am. We have really good UK universities, and we have, again, I'll stick my neck out here, we have an amazingly generous funding system for home students to stay at UK universities. So no big though it's debt and all this kind of stuff. Compare it to any other system in the world, really. We have a great regime for how it works in terms of paying it back. So if you're saying, well, what is the floor for my university search, which it may be in this case medicine at Bristol, which is going to cost that kid upfront nothing in terms of tuition. By the time they start paying it back, after a year or two, they're not going to notice probably that money coming out of their bank account. I might get some hate mail now for that. In the US, then that's a complicated thing, because then you're saying, well, if this is my floor, I'm only going to a university that I or my family might perceive as better. Then that gets complicated with the finances, because as you said, there is need-based aid and there is merit aid. Not many universities are offering a chunk of need-based aid to international students, and certainly not many are doing it need-blind. And so people get confused in the terminology, need-blind versus need-aware, merit scholarship. I've worked with students who've gone to a university like Harvard for free. I've gone to students who've been able to pay all the money for that kind of stuff. I've had students with very low grades get full scholarships from universities, which to them were worth that kind of thing. Finding full aid, like absolute full aid for an international student anywhere in the world, is the hardest gig in counselling. And very different. I mentioned already Joan Liu, who I know is speaking at your conference soon.
Yeah,
just extraordinary things in that space. If a student is starting off this process with saying, I want to go to the US on full scholarship, full need-based aid, and it's only going to be these 4 universities I consider. My ethical things will say to me, there is only one thing to say to the family, which is don't bother. You know, it's very unlikely to happen for the amount of effort you're going to put into it. Stay here, stay in whatever country you can go to, and and if you're really fascinated by going to the US, go for a year abroad, go for grad school.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a very frustrating thing for students when they realize that actually trying to find the money is so incredibly difficult, and that itself can actually just put them off.
Well, I'll give you an example from this year. Actually, I've got the pennant here, interestingly enough, conveniently. I run a pro bono counselling program for the HMC projects thing, which I know a few people are aware of, and it's mushrooming, these are students on full financial aid at UK boarding schools for sixth form, and some of them, for various complicated reasons, they can't stay in the UK because they're not EU passport holders, and their country doesn't necessarily recognise A levels for them to go back, so they need to find something else. And I worked with a student this year at Chigwell School who was admitted, and it's here, to Transylvania University, there they are, in Kentucky, with about a third scholarship. And it was a shame, and I was speaking to Alice Schaff there, and they couldn't offer him any more. He was a phenomenal student. And then he was admitted to Stanford on a full package. And you go, what? Relative merits of different universities, but that's how it goes. So it's a really, really complicated thing to find the money. And if you're talking about Stanford or Harvard, you and I are talking about it here. I'm in the East Midlands, you're in London. Pick any country on the planet. There will be people in that country at some point today where those universities will have been mentioned, and that is your competition. This student admitted to Stanford was running a worldwide committee of students about how schools could become more ecologically friendly, and he was being flown in to speak to governing bodies of schools all around the world about this. Now, that is a kid who gets full aid from Stanford.
Yeah, it's tricky. Getting into Stanford is tricky. Anyway,
I've worked with 2 students in my career. And you will find there will be extraordinary numbers of the world's best college counsellors who will have never had a student admitted to Stanford. Because the number, I said 29 out of 30, the numbers are crazy. If you and I were going to sit on a plane where such things arrived and the pilot came over and said, and now we've got a 1 in 30 chance of landing at the side of this, you'd get off. And yet people put themselves through the process without understanding. And particularly if they're comparing its selectivity rates to the UK. Your colleague Simon Lewis and I, who is a great college counsellor and has just started doing some more work in that field. He and I were talking recently about how do you compare Oxbridge to the Ivies. And I say, look, saying I want to go to Harvard is like saying I want to live in this particular room of this building at this Oxford college in terms of the level of selectivity. And sometimes families go, well, if you don't go to Oxbridge, we'll have a look at the Ivies. And it's the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. I think initially there's always this misconception that somehow America is a backup compared to the UK.
Yeah. Well, the Ivy League turned down 250,000 applicants last year.
Yeah, and
only 350,000 Brits went to university in the UK.
Yeah, and the statistic that I think you and I both always use is that even the top 1% of applicants in America couldn't get into the Ivy League because there aren't enough places.
And it's a hateful term, the Ivy League. So
yeah, we
should move on.
Okay, so moving on, I'm going to take some of these questions that are up here. I suppose we should tackle the elephant in the room, which is all of this conversation is set against the backdrop of COVID-19. Yeah. What do you think are the biggest changes that are going to happen this year and next year for students applying to college?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who promises to give answers is again sort of selling a bit of a lie, because we don't know. We can make educated guesses and think things through. I think, and it comes back to the kind of stuff we're talking about, ethics and training and things about this. If you just focus on getting the pieces of the puzzle done, if your job as an advisor is, you think, making sure kids do right things in the right order, without really understanding why, what is the strategy involved in this? Why is this admission system set up in the way? That can be really complicated right now. I think if you focus on the bigger reasons as to how a different country's admission system chooses to admit people, then you can start to piece it all together again as to, okay, it might not happen in the same way, but they're going to do different things to get to that outcome as to how that system picks countries. So I pick students. if there is no vaccine, if there is no treatment, and we still have to, this is the new normal where we're in and out. I say I'm a history graduate. I've read stuff from 1914 and stuff from 1939 of people saying, hey, such a shame we're like this for 4 months, but I'll see you at Christmas. And we could be in that situation now. We're all naively thinking, hey, I'll be able to have a beer with you, and you and I can go for dinner, Jason, in 3 months' time. Well, I might not see you for 6 years. Who knows what the world's going to be like. So there's no hard or fast answers. I think with anything, you have to control the controllables right now in terms of what you can do. And to add another cliche to it, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. If I was a student at a UK school in lower 6 or year 11 right now, I wouldn't be saying my only option is go to university in another country, because you just might not be able to. And so you've got to kind of hope for the best that, okay, if I want to go to Canada, if I want to go to Japan for university, then what must I do? What are the controllables that I really can control, whether that's preparing for a test, whether it's taking the right subjects, whether that's joining a club, whether it's getting the right bit of paperwork from an embassy. Do those things that you have to do and hope for the best, but also prepare for the fact of, and I talk this about a lot in my counselling, part of my job is not to make sure you can get that dream thing. A large part of my job is to make sure that the worst possible outcome is actually really good. And I say to raise that floor as high as I possibly can. I speak to a family I'm working with at the moment. The student has Edinburgh as a deferred offer for 2021. So that's a pretty good worst case scenario. So what can we build on that? So hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Make sure that you are focusing on that worst case option is a pretty good one as well. And then focus on what you're doing. So testing for the US. Tomorrow afternoon US time, so probably 9-10 o'clock our time, the College Board will email students in their system to let them start to register for SAT tests.
Yep.
If you are going down SAT versus ACT, if through discussions with team at US, with me, with your school advisor, with your family, you are still saying, right, testing is going to form part of my application strategy because I'm going to be really good at it, or the colleges I'm applying to are like still want it, or whatever that might be, then get yourself on there, book a test center, and be flexible about where that might be. Speak to if you're a boarding student, if you're joining us and you live in, I don't know, Kazakhstan, but you're at school over here, speak to your school. What is the likelihood that on September the 26th, I'm going to be in the UK? Because if it's unlikely I'm going to be at school in the UK, then I need to book a center in Almaty rather than a center in London. So get all the kind of controllables controlled and go from there.
Okay. I really like what you said about controlling the controllables. I feel exactly the same way. It's a really odd time because in many ways, I think we all agree that we feel a little bit helpless and a little bit useless against everything that's happening out there. But at the same time, we all have an unprecedented amount of time to be able to get things done that we wouldn't have had time otherwise. And my message to my students all the time is, look, try and keep yourself busy and do things that you know are important. So like you said, start doing those extracurriculars, start doing your testing, make sure that you're engaging at school and getting good grades, because those are the things you can control. And if you can come out of this situation having nailed those things and having those things in your armor, if you like, then you're in a good position for whatever happens after that. Yeah. The worst thing you can do is just sit back and go, well, I don't know what's going to happen, so I won't do anything. Yeah. But then nothing's going to happen later.
Well, I mean, and I would say that when it comes back to what I try to do, and I like calling myself a counsellor. I think it's part of just the way of doing this. That if you are a student and actually in COVID-19, you want to, what appeals to you, what gets you through the situation is being on Fortnite. I don't know whether Fortnite exists, but still, but being on Fortnite for 8 hours a day. If that's your thing, then that's your thing. But let's then find universities where you can do that thing that likes a kid like that, whether that's anywhere around the world, but even within the US. The US, when I was at ISB with my good friends and colleagues, Karen Sagal and Craig Brown, we used to do an activity with our year 11s, and we would put, I can't remember, we had like location, size, specials, whatever. We had lots of categories, and we would then cut up random things and then allocate them to a group of students and say, right, you 5 university students, you need to now create an ad campaign for this university. And it might be co-ed, Jewish, in Tennessee, with a specialism in volleyball or whatever it might be. Most of those universities, we could find one that actually existed. So the US gives you everything. So students should do a thing that's authentic to them. And you get this, when I say focusing on how does US admissions work in terms of the big picture, the strategy, rather than getting a little bit to the tactics right of, if you are that spiky kid who just loves gaming, then don't apply to a university that doesn't like that. Don't try and be something that you're not, whether it's to satisfy yourself, to satisfy your parents or whoever, because it's not about getting into a good, however you define that university. It's about getting out 4 years later. Being the stupidest person at Stanford could not be the fun experience for anyone. That must be soul destroying. Why would anyone want to go through that process? Go and be the best person somewhere else and work out what best means for you in that whole process. So there's definitely that. What I will also say in this whole moment is it's kind of a gut check moment for everybody of, I'm very pleased. A lot of students I'm working with now have listened and are understanding this. And, I have to say I'm quite picky a little bit about who I want to work with. I said to students that the world needs talented, committed, hardworking young people, whether that be to go and deliver shopping for an elderly neighbor, whether that be to go and pick fruit that's going to be going rotten in the fields because we need it, or a student who I was working with who's a talented singer-songwriter, get on Skype and Zoom and sing songs to the people stuck in the care home who've not had a visitor for 7 weeks, whatever it is. And so I was on a Unifog webinar recently, and someone asked a question about good universities, and it triggered stuff in the back of my mind that you and I will say, that's a good school, that's a good university, because it's kind of rankings and academics and stuff. I really hope we come out of this, the good university means something else, and a good student means the actual literal definition of that word. A good university is one that showed through COVID-19 that it treated all the members of its community well. And a good student is not one with 3 A stars, but might be not the nicest human being. It might be a student with A's and B's who actually gave something of themselves to make our world a better place.
So a great hope, and I hope you're right. We talked a lot about America, and of course, both of us, and especially you, advise students on applying all around the world. One person has asked here, what are some of the misconceptions about applying to the US? Are there times when, because you said it's got something for everyone, but are there times when applying to the US is really not the right thing to do?
Yeah, there definitely are. And some of those will be with practical constraints, and some of them will be just with the realities of doing it. So practical constraints will be you want to study something that the US is not going to be the best place to do it. Either it's just not highly ranked in that thing and you're really good at it, or medicine, law, dentistry and things where you're going to spend a chunk of money on an education with a piece of paper that you're going to have to go and start back again because the qualification doesn't work in those kind of things. I would say also for the robustness of a student, and this is where, again, my accreditations and working with the school are important. There are some students I speak to and I think, I wouldn't want you that far away from home. You can see the pictures I've got here. I've got my own 3 kids. I take that seriously, that some students are not necessarily as robust to deal with that, particularly if they want West Coast. That 8-hour time difference makes it sometimes really difficult to come into contact. But the biggest one is if you don't prepare properly, and you are someone who's really involved in lots of different things, the amount of work taken to applying to the US can potentially ruin your last year at school, particularly that first term. So if you were thinking you're coming to upper 6, you might be a school prefect or a house captain or something. You might want to run house shouts, the singing competition. You might be playing first team sport. Your friends will have 18th birthdays and things. If you are committing to some of the most competitive US universities and potentially Oxbridge, you might end up in a situation where your best friend's got their 18th birthday and you say, I can't go because I've got to write my Common App essay. Now, that is not the way this process should work. And so it's in those kind of things where you might say, just because of the actual reality of doing this, applying to the US might not suit you, or stagger your application. Quite often I'm working with families where we're going UK this year, and if it doesn't work out, then we'll have a gap year and look at the US. So it's really, really personal. The ones I will say selfishly I find the most joy in working with are those students who go, I just want something different. I don't want to be in the UK. Help me find something different. And that for me is just the absolute pleasure of working with that kind of student. So
give us a hidden gem then. What are some of your favorite hidden gem universities around the world outside of the US? Well, I wish I could mention the name of the student, but the ethics don't allow me to. I started working with a student, probably 18 months or so ago. A student was at a boarding school in Kent, was on the gap year. And she wanted math, sociology, and psychology at university and had been struggling to find it. It came through us through a contact.
And the family didn't want the US. They didn't want North America for various complicated reasons. So they were looking mostly at Europe. And I guess being naive, didn't realize that the child's first name was the Japanese word for cherry blossom. So someone might be able to work that out. I didn't realize that they had quite significant Japanese heritage. And I just chucked in there one day, well, actually, I think the International Liberal Studies at Waseda in Japan would be a really good fit. And the dad chuckled away and said, let me just go and introduce you to my wife, who was Japanese. We were on a Zoom call. And I had no idea. And they had no idea that there were a bunch of English language programs in Japan. And the Waseda program, SILS, School of International Liberal Studies, enabled the student to combine all these kind of things and reconnect with a whole chunk of her heritage that coming to UK boarding school and living in Europe hadn't enabled her to do. And she applied in the early bird round. We dealt with all the bureaucracy. Anyone that's done Japanese applications knows it's not just how you complete the application, it's the order in which you do the application and the order in which it's put into the envelope and how that's sent. We did all of that kind of stuff. And she's there and it's loving it. And so that's one option of students who want Japan out there. I think some really great niche programs. One of the ones I'm loving at the moment is Algebra University College in Croatia.
Algebra
University College in Croatia, which you can guess what that specializes in. Yeah, Jason Wiley wants to go there with his PhD and that kind of stuff. So those kind of things. Central European University, I was on a call with them earlier. Very complicated politics. They were set up in Hungary after the fall of the Soviet Union. As a graduate university, Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, has used them as a target. They've now had to move to Vienna, and they've just launched 2 undergrad programs this year, a PPE program and a sort of social sciences program. Full now for this year, but they were offering 50% scholarships for anyone who did want to go this year. And I've got a webinar coming up with them and with Bard College in Berlin, another great social sciences school in Europe. So those kind of things. I don't know. You could let me talk for now, Jason, and I will keep telling you about wonderful.
You've given us some great tips. I'm going to look at Algebra University straight after this.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got I would say 5-10 minutes left. So
you haven't tested me yet.
I haven't. I'll say that to the end. I've got a few other questions that I've got written down. I'm just debating about which order to ask.
I will try and be more concise. That is one thing I know I am not. I tend to ramble. So you can.
But everything you say is very interesting, David. So it's absolutely fine. I'll interrupt you as soon as you become boring. Okay, so I think we'll talk about schools because we started talking about those at the beginning when we were talking about your career. And one thing you touched on was that some schools are extremely good at this and understand the importance of employing someone to look after international university applications. But there are still some schools, quite incredibly, that send an awful lot of people abroad. And the ability for them to say how many people they send to the US each year is actually quite a big selling point for them. Yet they still don't spend the money on hiring really good international university counselors in the school. Why is that, first of all? What do you think is going on there? Why don't they make that connection, especially when school is seen by so many as the route to university? And secondly, what would be your message to the heads of those schools? We're hoping optimistically that they're listening. But what would be your message to the heads of those schools to try and convince them that maybe this is something worth spending money on?
Yeah, well, I'll start off with saying that we know the reality is that school budgets are going to be struggling in every both maintained and private sectors. So what I'm going to say, I know schools won't be able to do, or very few will be able to do. I will be generous in terms of why don't schools do it, because they don't know that they can. I think my family now understand how I earn a living. I mean, partly that's because my sister has proofread all my website and my brother is a web designer who's built my website, so they've actually been engaged in it. But it's not a job, it's not a profession. I am a college counsellor. Most people outside of our little bubble of work that we do, and there are probably, I'll say 500, maybe there are 500 people in the UK who could actually explain cogently what I do for a living, what you do for a living, what an admissions officer for a US university does for a living. And so that's a tiny, tiny fraction. So I think most school leaders, governors, bursars, whoever, don't know that they can find someone in this kind of stuff. And there is a school, and I won't mention them, but you can buy boots and have a beef that's similar to this, pay more money to outsource their US advising to a company then it would cost you to employ probably one of the world's best college counsellors and have them live on your site, which I find extraordinary, but that's by the by. I think most schools don't know that there is a thing called college counselling. University advising in the UK, and the route that I was on, is a stepping stone position. Normally, head of careers, head of higher education, head of sixth form is on your way to becoming a deputy head. So it's not something, I was assistant head when I was in Brussels with this kind of stuff. And I outranked the academic heads of department. Because it was the way it was. It was important. So people don't necessarily know that they can get someone to do this. I think if you and I, again, we live and breathe this. If you don't know that studying at MIT is a fundamentally different experience to studying at Harvard, despite the fact that they are down the road from each other, then you don't know. And if all you know is UCAS, or still some schools you hear someone talking about UCA, if that's all you know, and you can be lulled into this false sense of security that applying to university is really, really easy. And so why would you spend even, £25,000 on getting someone to just do university advising, let alone a team of 5 people and a huge budget like it had at ISB? Why would you pay for someone to go to conferences? Why would you get someone trained? Because you can't be that. And I'll give a shout out to my good friend Phelan Bolster, who's the head at high school at ISB. He's about to go to AIS in Madrid. He gives up a week of his year to go on the road with the head of college counselling to go and visit universities. And he said time and time again, this was eye-opening for me. I did not know how complicated this was. And it was my friend and predecessor, Johanna Fishbein, who started that with him, that he learned a lot. I think if most UK school heads went and spent a week, even just visiting UK universities, understanding this, they would be staggered at actually how they are getting by on a shoestring. And I think they would all go, I don't know how we did this. But it's because UCAS is designed that even if every part of your application is appalling, you will get a place. The rest of the world is not like that.
Yeah. That's a good tip. And I hope maybe some of the people listening can take some of those messages and pass them on constructively to their schools.
Well, I've got a podcast on this. I interviewed my friend Anna Wright, who was at TASIS in England, now works at the Benjamin School in Florida. And I actually said to her, right, tell us people what your job is. And if you listen to that podcast, or a previous one with Nancy Bean, who's just retired from being a high school counsellor in the school in Atlanta, it's amazing actually what a proper college counsellor can do for a school. So if you are listening to this and think, I don't know anything about this, listen to that. And if you want to hire a college counsellor, email me, because I've got lots of people who'd like to have a job in the UK.
Yeah, maybe more so now.
Yeah.
Okay, and one last question that I've got written down is, you have what some people describe as an encyclopaedic knowledge of universities. Have you got a tip for budding counsellors on how to retain, maybe how to organise that sort of information? Have you got any kind of systems that you use for keeping track of what's going on at different universities and what programs there are here and there?
So I'm very fortunate that I have that mind. I am that person who was trained to learn about how many soldiers fought at this battle on this day in 1632 or whatever it might be. So I do have a mind for detail, and I'm very fortunate that way. There is no good way to be a counsellor. I am the counsellor I am because of my academic training, my skill set, my nature via my nurture. I am a geeky academic guy. Yes, these books are nicely curated behind me, but these aren't books about the Rolling Stones or Beyonce's. Look, I have cricket and I have travel and I have lots of geeky stuff about politics and universities. Be the counsellor that you are going to be. What is your skill set? I am not the most touchy-feely person, and so I'm not probably best suited to that kind of stuff. I had to learn about it. I am someone who can pull bits of information out the back of their head and do that. And so I would say for someone who wants to get into this, work out what your skill set is, and then find stuff who can help you with things that you're not. I can't do DIY. I pay people to do DIY. I can't do test prep. It's not my skill set. I might know some good people who's called UES who are good at test prep. So, it's all those kind of bits of it. I read a lot would be the one thing I say. It's a really important part of my practice to be on social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook a couple of times a day on the professional pages and following certain people and keeping up to date and reading those kind of things. It's my due diligence of what's going on. Every single day on one of those platforms, I see something where I think, God, I'm glad I did that today. because if I might have missed that tomorrow. And so if there is a tip, join the associations, International ACAC, CIS if your school's not a member, follow thought leaders on Twitter, on other social media, on LinkedIn, delve into this. But if that's not you, if you are better suited, then don't worry about it. Everyone is a different counsellor.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, let's since we've only got a few minutes left, let's try and test you then. I'm just going to try and make something up. Or if anyone listening wants to ask David either about a real student or a fictitious student. Actually, we do have a question from Simon. Actually,
I was about to say, if this is a Simon, then the drink's on him next time. Go ahead.
I've just seen. I have to apologise to him because I didn't scroll down on the messages, and I've just seen them. Simon asked, "What are the merits of applying to a consortium such as the Claremont colleges?" There we go. He's deliberately trying to test you there, or the Tri-College Consortium in Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
so merits for doing that.
Well, you're looking for something where you might be able to, that kind of process when you're looking at, well, I say academic fit and cultural fit. So you're looking at a university, the style of the curriculum might suit a student. So where their core, their distribution requirements, however they construct their curriculum, and you're also saying, well, what is the environment there? By applying to a consortium, the Tri-College, the Claremonts, in the town of Amherst, you've got a couple of schools, even Wellesley, you can take classes at Harvard and these kind of things. Enables you to maybe broaden that a little bit. So you might find the academics at, say, Harvey Mudd might really suit you, but actually the wider culture of another university within a consortium might do that. Or you might find that I really want to be at Pitzer, but being at Pitzer enables me to take classes at Harvey Mudd and take classes at Claremont McKenna. You might want Wellesley. I love Wellesley. It's one of the most amazing colleges I've ever visited. You might want Wellesley, but you might want to take class at Babson, a business class, down the road. Wellesley's not going to offer the same business classes as Babson would do. So the culture fits you, but the academics, you might be able to access a wider consortium.
Okay, thanks. So I was going to invite people to give a very brief description of a student and say where they should end up going to college. I'll tell you what, I'm going to make it a bit more personal, if you don't mind. What's your eldest daughter's name? Am I allowed to ask that?
My eldest daughter is Alice. I have the photos behind them.
How old is Alice?
Alice is 10, and if anyone want to listen to podcast episode 50, recorded in this very room, you can see that she interviewed me for that episode. She used the university girl. In fact, I think she's wearing
that was a great episode.
A T-shirt from SUNY Plattsburgh today, so she does like a university stash.
Great. So in 8 years' time, she may be going off to university.
Yeah.
She may do something else, but knowing what you know about her personality, and presumably she has one because she's age 10,
yes.
What sort of university, have you got an idea already? What sort of place might suit her?
Yeah, well, this is I think the tragedy of being a university advisor, that it is the family gig, and they travelled with me to various conferences and should have been doing this summer. So I think back to my own thing. The first time I visited Oxford, and I'm that horrible cliche that my parents went at Oxford and my uncle went to Oxford, and so I'm sorry for that. The first time I ever went was when I went on an open day. So my parents didn't explicitly talk about university, though I knew people and knew it was kind of in the ether. Was Alice tells you she wants to study architecture. She wants to study architecture at Cambridge, and if not, she'll go to IE in Spain. And she has talked to recruitment and admissions officers from both of those universities already. So it's slightly an unfair question. I know that looking ahead, I will have that same issue I think lots of parents have of, I live in a world of business and jobs and these kind of things, and I know that perhaps the cachet of university might matter, but I also want my child to be fulfilled and that kind of stuff. And I think actually about it from time to time, that should I be helping my children do this kind of process? All the counsellors choose not to for that kind of reason. So maybe I will be involved in there. I don't know is the answer. As long as there is a process, as long as there is some thought involved in it, as long as she looks at all sorts of different options, genuinely, I don't mind. I don't think any parent in the world would say they want their child to be unhappy. How they define that might be different things, and there might be, in the same way as, my dad was entirely right to tell me that I needed speech and language classes and fight me kicking off aged 8 about it because I had quite a bad stutter as a child. My dad was right to make me do something that was unpleasant, in the same way as I try and make my kids eat peas. But what in the long run, can I see her studying architecture at somewhere like Cambridge? Yeah, I can. And that's quite scary that she actually might know what she's talking about there. But who knows? I mean, this is the joy of doing this work. It is a journey. It is helping people find out those kind of things and understanding where they might find their best fit. University is not a badge to be worn. It's not a bumper sticker to have on the back of the car. It's something that should be meaningful and transformational for that young person. Whether that's they need to join a community of students that fits them in another way, whether there's a subject that they love, whether they just need to work it out, whether they just want to ski, whatever it might be. That's why I love this work. That's why so many people love this work. And so I hope, touch wood, that Alice and her two sisters will be able to have that experience as well, regardless of where they go.
I think that's a really nice positive note to end on, David. And
I'm soppy, really.
Well, do you know what? I think most people in this industry actually are. So people who are counsellors and care about the future of students, they get emotional about it because you're looking at students going through one of the most transformative periods of their lives. And it's a privilege to be able to help with that, even just a little bit, even if they completely forget about you at the moment they go to university.
That is the way it should be. I sometimes say to the families, I've said to lots of my friends with kids of similar ages, that for about 18 months of your life, I might be a really important person and then just disappear, go off and have fun. It's lovely seeing former students who do this, and it's great. But I have my own personal favourites universities. I always say to, hello, Tim Neal and Leanne Backlund, can I have that 3 scholarships at Sewanee, please? Because I love that university. But it's entirely independent of every single student. It's their process, and it's a privilege to help them.
Brilliant. Okay, David, I think we'll end there because we've gone 1 minute over. So I'm going to end the live video now, but we'll stay on and have a quick debrief.
Thank you, everybody. I hope I passed my test.
But no, thank you, David. We really appreciate it. And actually, just to finish off, do you want to tell people how they can get hold of you if they need to?
Universityguys.com or hello@theuniversityguys.com, or any one of various social media things. Send a message and we will do our best to get back in touch.
Brilliant. Thanks, David.